Egypt's history is a story of power and persistence, of invaders and of those who endured, but it is also simple to start with. The Nile made life possible, and people organized themselves around that river, forming communities that became states. Once Egypt was organized, it attracted attention because control of the Nile meant food, wealth, and influence across a region hungry for resources. Early Egyptian kings created a model of rule that impressed their neighbors, a model built on ritual, law, and centralized administration. This system worked well for centuries, but no human creation is perfectly stable. Droughts, weak rulers, and local rivalries sometimes fractured authority, and those moments of weakness invited new players, groups from the surrounding deserts and riverlands with new weapons, ideas, or ambitions. One of the earliest foreign arrivals were the Hyksos, people from the Levant, who entered Egypt during a period historians call the Second Intermediate Age. They brought military technologies unfamiliar to Egyptians at that time, light chariots, composite bows, and they established rule in the Delta. Their presence changed warfare and administration, forcing Egyptians to innovate and adapt their defenses and their statecraft. Egyptian resistance to the Hyksos culminated in a dramatic expulsion, and the recovery of the Delta sparked the New Kingdom, an era of military reformation and expansion. Egypt's rulers now organized professional armies, improved logistics, and projected power beyond their traditional borders. The New Kingdom pharaohs sought wealth, tribute, and security, campaigning into Nubia and the Levant, and building a network of influence across North Africa and the Near East. Imperialism reshaped Egyptian society too. Conquered lands supplied resources and manpower, temples and monuments celebrated victories, and international trade brought new goods and ideas into Egyptian cities. At the same time, crews of administrators and soldiers lived abroad, creating contacts and cultural exchange. Egypt began to be known not only for its pyramids, but for its reach, a major power in a wider world. But expansion also bred resistance. In Nubia, a distinct kingdom grew south of Egypt, rich in gold and trade, and not content to remain a satellite. Nubian rulers adopted many Egyptian practices, but they retained their identity, and centuries later, Kushite kings marched north into Egypt, taking the throne themselves. They ruled as pharaohs in their own right, reminding us that influence flows both ways. Foreign empires from the east also tested Egypt. The Assyrians, a fierce Mesopotamian power, pushed into the region during the first millennium BCE, using siegecraft and organized armies to impose control. Their campaigns weakened existing powers and opened space for new alignments, shifting the political map in ways that reshaped Egyptian urban centers and elite relationships. Following Assyria, the Persian Empire inserted itself into Egyptian history. Persian kings treated Egypt as an important satrapy, managing taxation, grain production, and strategic positions. Persian rule brought integration into a much larger imperial economy, and while administrative systems continued, many Egyptians experienced their daily lives under non-Egyptian governors and new fiscal demands. Then came Alexander the Great, whose conquest in 332 BCE introduced a radical new fusion: Greek rulers sitting on the Nile. Alexander's successors, the Ptolemies, built Alexandria as a cosmopolitan capital, a place of scholarship, commerce, and Mediterranean influence. Greek language and institutions spread through elites, while the rural population often remained culturally Egyptian, resulting in a layered society with multiple identities. Under the Ptolemies, Egyptian religion and administration continued, but in hybrid forms. The Greek rulers became pharaohs in form, sponsoring Egyptian cults and building temples, while also promoting Greek learning, astronomy, and medicine. Alexandria's library and its scholars made Egypt a center of ancient science, attracting thinkers from across the Mediterranean world. The story of Cleopatra VII marks the end of Ptolemaic independence and the beginning of Roman domination. Cleopatra's politics involved alliances, war, and dramatic choices that entangled Egypt with Rome. After her defeat, Egypt became a Roman province, prized for its agricultural output and strategic location, supplying grain and serving as a wealthy, well-administered corner of the empire. Roman rule reorganized economic life, emphasizing large-scale production and taxation for imperial needs. Cities retained their civic life, elites adapted Roman legal practices, and Egyptian religious traditions continued in new contexts. Christianity took hold in this era, giving rise to the Coptic Church, which blended old Egyptian religious sensibilities with Christian doctrine in a distinctly Egyptian form. The decline of Roman power led into late antiquity, a period of religious contestation and social change, but also a time when Egyptian monasticism flourished. Desert monks and ascetics formed communities that became spiritual centers, influencing Christianity across the Mediterranean and preserving written texts and theological debates in a changing world. In the 7th century CE, the Arab-Muslim armies arrived, and with them came Islam and the Arabic language. The conquest was swift, but the transformation was gradual. Over generations, Arabic became dominant in administration and culture, and Islam grew to be the majority religion, while long-standing traditions, Christian, Jewish, and earlier Egyptian, continued within new frameworks. Under successive Islamic dynasties, Egypt became a key province in a vast cultural world. The Fatimid period created a golden age for Cairo, which became a capital of political and religious learning. Scholars, jurists, and Sufi thinkers flourished, and Cairo's markets and madrasas made it a cosmopolitan hub connecting Africa, Asia, and Europe. A striking chapter is the rise of the Mamluks, who were initially slave soldiers recruited from the Eurasian steppes. Over time, they seized power and ruled as sultans, defending Egypt from Mongol advances and Crusader incursions. Their legacy includes magnificent architecture, patronage of learning, and a political order centered on warrior elites and mercantile interests. The Ottoman conquest in the early 16th century folded Egypt into a larger imperial system administered from Istanbul. Ottoman governors oversaw taxation and defense, while local elites and military leaders continued to wield significant influence. Egypt's strategic role, controlling Red Sea and Mediterranean connections, made it essential to Ottoman logistics and trade. Even under Ottoman rule, local reformers and modernizers arose. By the late 18th and early 19th centuries, Muhammad Ali Pasha, an Ottoman commander of Albanian origin, embarked on sweeping reforms. He built a modern army, industrial ventures, and irrigation works, launching a state-directed modernization that altered Egypt's economy and social structure. Muhammad Ali's policies increased agricultural output, reorganized taxation, and built new industries, but they also entangled Egypt in global politics. European powers watched closely, and the drive for modernization required capital and expertise that linked Egypt ever more tightly to European economies and influence. Napoleon's 1798 expedition briefly occupied Egypt and sparked European scientific curiosity about its antiquities. French scholars documented monuments and artifacts, and European archaeologists later decoded Egyptian history. That intellectual attention increased competition for influence, and by the late 19th century, Britain formally intervened and established a prolonged military presence. British occupation reshaped Egypt's economy and governance, focusing on canal projects, railways, and export agriculture, especially cotton. While infrastructure modernized parts of the country, colonial rule deepened inequalities and generated nationalist opposition. Egyptians began to organize politically, demanding representation, dignity, and control over their own resources. Nationalist movements and protests culminated in major events like the 1919 Revolution, and later, the 1952 Free Officers' Coup, which ended the monarchy and led to republican governance. Leaders like Gamal Abdel Nasser embodied a new narrative of anti-colonial pride, state-driven development, and pan-Arab ambition, reshaping Egypt's role in the post-colonial world. Empire's imprint is visible everywhere in Egypt's landscape and institutions, in roads and canals, in legal systems, in language shifts, and in religious communities. Yet the deeper truth is human. Ordinary Egyptians continued to farm, trade, worship, and raise families through these changes, adapting foreign tools while preserving local rhythms and social ties. Conquest often meant extraction and suffering, but it also brought technology, knowledge, and techniques that Egyptians could appropriate. Bronze weaponry, administrative record-keeping, coinage, irrigation engineering, and later, modern schooling and medicine, many of these arrived with conquest, only to be transformed into local strengths. Today, Egyptian identity is layered, a palimpsest of pharaohs, Greeks, Romans, Christians, Arabs, Ottomans, and modern reformers. Each era left marks, some visible in stone, others woven into language, law, and ceremony. Understanding the eras of conquest helps explain modern Egypt's social tensions, its institutional forms, and its place in global history. As we finish this episode, remember that empires are not a single story of domination, but a complex tale of exchange, resistance, and adaptation. Egypt's long history of invasions and rule reveals how people and places absorb shock and transform it into new forms of life, culture, and governance across centuries. If this examination of conquest and power captured your interest, please like the video and subscribe to World Atlas Project so you don't miss the next episode, where we will go inside daily life, culture, and belief in Egypt to meet the people who persisted through every empire. Tell us in the comments which invasion or era surprised you most, and suggest the country you want to see explored next. Your suggestions help shape the series, and every comment matters. Thank you for watching, and join us next time as we move from the politics of power to the quiet, resilient practices of daily life along the Nile.